Hi everyone, I'm Candace Lewis. I'm speaking for the Dutchess County Historical Society in Dutchess County, New York State. I'm an art historian and I'm going to introduce you to a work of art by a largely unknown artist. Caroline Morgan Clowes is an important 19th century American animal painter working in Dutchess County, New York at the end of the movement known as the Hudson River School. Miss Clowes lived from 1838 to 1904. She moved to a family home in LaGrange to live with her aunt and uncle, and when she was 13 years old. There on the apple farm with a cattle farm next door, she would make her base for the remainder of her life. And there, with instruction and nurturing from the extended Hart-Hubbard family and lessons from Frederick Rondell, an artist closely associated with Matthew Vassar and Vassar College, she would become an accomplished painter. The Clowes paintings, drawings, letters, diaries, and other possessions have remained at the family homestead from her death until recently in 2019, when E. Stewart and Linda Hubbard donated the collection to the Dutchess County Historical Society. Caroline Clowes painted this image of two animals from the next door neighbor's farm, or possibly from the Hart family farm. Both farms were on the Wappingers Creek. Two cows at Wappingers Creek was painted as a wedding gift for Caroline's cousin. By this time, the artist was mature and fully trained in life drawing, landscape, and the technique of producing oil paintings. If we look closely at the painting, we will see the artist's ability to portray farmyard animals in a naturalistic manner. Two cows, one red, one white, draw close to the water for a drink. The large animals simultaneously come close to the front surface of the painting, right where we as viewers can see them. The image looks so real. The artist pays attention to the light and shade on the coats of the animals. We can almost hear the rustle of the leaves of the big elm tree as they move gently in the wind. The perspective of the landscape appears natural, with a believable recession into the distance. The artist presents a meticulous, detailed style with high surface polish. In these two details, we can see how Miss Clowes has portrayed the landscape and elements of large tree with foliage, reflective pool, small pebbles, ferns, wildflowers, distant trees, and aerial perspective are all carefully depicted. The artist has relied on a traditional color palette of greens and deep browns. We see when we look at the preparatory drawings that Caroline Clowes made, such as this one of horses' legs, that she was carefully observing and recording the anatomy of the farm animals she could see in her everyday life. We could note that Miss Clowes' life drawing derived from the tradition of Michelangelo, the 16th century Italian Renaissance master. In Miss Clowes' case, however, she was not able to study the human nude. Society did not condone women studying from the nude figure during Caroline's formative years, so she developed her abilities by studying animals. The landscape setting that Caroline produced was based upon a relatively new model offered earlier in the 19th century by a founder of the Hudson River School, Asher B. Duran, introduced landscapes in a vertical format that previously would have been regarded as sketches. He, however, showed them as finished works. Miss Clowes has adopted this vertical format, added portraits of animals, and maximized the intimacy of the painting type. Here in this detail, I would like to point out the beautiful handling of light and shade in this image. The light coming from behind dances on the surface of the red cow, the back, the ear, the face, and the neck. Here is a view of another painting by Miss Clowes. Although her preferred subject was farm animals, she did also paint landscapes. This image of an autumn landscape, a small oil painting, is not dated, but probably was created fairly early in her career. We are especially aware of the strong, warm autumn red and gold colors. But another strength of this small painting is the expert handling of recession into depth, an aerial perspective, showing the misty appearance of faraway mountains and forests. In the painting Three Sheep, also not dated, the style is consistent with the two cows at Wappingers Creek. During her lifetime, Caroline Clowes was a relatively well-known artist. She exhibited her paintings widely. Perhaps the high point of her career was the Philadelphia Centennial Exhibition of 1876. She did not exhibit in the Women's Pavilion. Rather, she was invited to exhibit in the main room on the most important wall with other contemporary American artists, nearly all of them actually male. The main exhibit room is visible in this contemporary photograph with an overlay of the wall presenting Miss Clowes' painting. Her exhibition painting, now lost, of Cows at a Creek, was hung up high in the third tier, here shown outlined in a circle. This work was probably very similar to her painting that we are looking at, The Two Cows at Wappinger Creek. Here from the archive is a day ticket to the 1876 Philadelphia Centennial Exhibition. It shows one of the few photographs of Caroline Clowes. We now know, based upon new research, that Miss Clowes worked chiefly in Dutchess County, but she also established herself for periods of time in New York City and Brooklyn, and was part of the art scene there. She traveled to Long Island and Florida frequently. The family owned property in both locations. It seems she never went to Europe. The records indicate that her life was busy and almost entirely devoted to art. After her death, however, her artworks remained at the family home here in Dutchess County, and her reputation as the top American artist languished. There is no question that the paintings of Caroline M. Clowes represent the work of an artist of great ability. We could even make the argument that she may have been the finest painter of animals in America in the 19th century. We are presented with a question: how did an important American artist become lost for over 100 years? There are, I believe, three issues that contributed to the fading of her star. 1. Gender. Few female artists achieved lasting fame in the 19th century in America. 2. Style. Artistic style was changing dramatically in the later 19th century as many artists began to experiment with aspects of Impressionism, Post-Impressionism, and other newly developed styles. 3. The American ideal. The overarching theme of American life was changing during the 19th century. At the beginning of the century, the ideal of the yeoman farmer was paramount. By the beginning and later decades, the conquering of the West and the idealization of the cowboy would capture the imagination of the American public. The first issue is gender. Few female artists achieved lasting fame in the 19th century in American art. The role of women in American art of the later 19th century is more complicated than one might expect. After the Civil War, by the time of financial recovery and the success of a growing moneyed class in the last decades of the century, young women flooded the art schools. There were so many, in fact, that they made up 30 to 50% of major art schools in Boston, New York, and Philadelphia. They were limited, however, by strictures prohibiting them from studying from the nude figure and studying in the same classes with male students. Then, in the years just before and around 1900, there was a backlash as male artists sought to reassert a dominant role. Let us look at the work of Caroline Clowes in relation to that of a contemporary male artist. Winslow Homer painted this work, Weaning the Calf, in 1875. It is now in the Museum of Fine Arts, Houston. The artist is believed to have intended the painting to be exhibited as his entry at the 1876 Centennial exhibit in Philadelphia, a fair expected to be visited by hundreds of Americans and was in fact visited by several million. In the event, Homer did not exhibit this painting, but another nearly identical one based upon the two central figures of the young black boy and the calf, entitled The Unruly Calf. In this painting, we see a narrative as the young calf is pulled away from its mother, the cow being restrained by the farmer in the cow mother, that is, being restrained by the farmer in the upper right of the canvas. Two small boys at the side watch the drama with interest. The artist does not explain the social position or attitude toward the young black boy. The work was painted in the years after the Civil War and before the end of Reconstruction in 1876. Winslow Homer was 2 years older than Caroline Clowes. He came from Boston but settled in New York City to pursue his career. There's an interesting, besides the fact that these two artists were very close in age and both pursued some of their career in New York City, there's another connection between them, and that is that they both studied with the same master, a man from Europe, and that's Frederick Rondel, whom I've already mentioned. Homer had several advantages. He was a man and was granted entry into clubs and organizations where women were denied. As a man, he was able to study drawing from the nude. He had been an illustrator at the beginning of his career and had gained some national attention through his published illustrations. Publicity in the field of art was important even in the 19th century. He had spent a few months with General McClellan's army pushing into Virginia during the Civil War, a harrowing experience he never forgot. His illustrations and later paintings based upon that episode were widely seen. He would go on to paint scenes of country and coastal life. Throughout his career, he would be fundamentally a figure painter and would communicate with viewers through narrative vignettes connected to quickly vanishing modes of American life. Artists like Eliza Greatorex, Caroline Clowes, and other once well-known female artists were erased from the history of American art, but Homer would remain. He became one of America's most renowned and revered artists, while the women artists of his generation have largely disappeared from view. The second issue is style. Artistic style was changing in the later 19th century. Artistic style shifted toward Impressionism and Post-Impressionism. Mary Cassatt, like Winslow Homer, was a contemporary of Caroline Clowes. Miss Cassatt, 6 years younger than Miss Clowes, came from a banking family in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. As a young woman, she moved to Paris to study art, at first academic painting and drawing, similar to what Miss Clowes had been doing. But soon she became acquainted with Edgar Degas and began to adopt the style of the Impressionists, the group Degas had helped to found. Here is Mary Cassatt's painting entitled The Bath. It was painted in 1892, and it now is in the Art Institute of Chicago. If we compare the Clowes painting of two cows with the Cassatt painting, The Bath, we see great differences in style. Mary Cassatt has abandoned close fidelity to nature in her representation and is instead experimenting with flattened forms and patterns. The colors are light and bright, very different from those in the work by Miss Clowes. The rug, pitcher, basin, back wall, and chest of drawers all have been rendered as flat images most interesting for their color and design. The two figures of mother and child have some three-dimensionality, but they too are notable for patterning and color. The method of depicting the child is especially interesting, for the artist has shown some modeling in light and shade around the torso, for example. At the same time, Cassatt has adopted a technique from Japanese prints, outlining the forms in strong black lines, resulting in a patterning effect. This comparison is interesting in relation to our first issue, the role of the female artist. It is ironic. Of all the female painters from America in the late 19th century, only this one, Mary Cassatt, the one who fled the country of her birth, was the one to achieve lasting fame. Finally, let us look at the third and last issue, the American ideal. The overarching theme of American life was changing in the later 19th century. There was a shift from the theme of the yeoman farmer to the taming of the West and glorification of the cowboy. A generation younger than both Caroline Clowes and Winslow Homer, Frederick Remington, nevertheless, lived a somewhat similar life. He grew up in Massachusetts, then moved to New York City to pursue his artistic career. He made many trips to the West and made it the subject of his work. It should be remembered, however, that the age of the cowboy that he depicted so beautifully in his paintings and sculptures was already a thing of the past by the time he traveled west. In this painting, Aiding a Comrade of 1889, now in the Museum of Fine Arts, Houston, Remington shows 3 Western cowboys riding their horses full speed at us, the viewers. They are galloping over a desert-like flat plain. This is a scene of high drama. The rider in the middle has fallen from his mount, and his comrades are reaching to help him. There are a few similarities between these two works. Both represent animals in natural American settings. Only one, of course, could be called an animal painting, that by Miss Clowes. Both bring the action close to the viewer. The differences, however, are much more pronounced. The coloration of the later work no longer depends on the soothing tones of natural greens and browns, though, which is a very traditional palette, but is lighter with dark accents. The drama of the figures is emphasized. The tone is different, too. Where Miss Clowes' painting is gentle with the so-called feminine sensibility of the Victorian age, the Remington painting stresses a masculine preference for action. Above all, there is a shift in America from aspiring to be the yeoman farmer, an idea promoted by Thomas Jefferson, to the young man who would forge his way into the newly opened West. Starting with tales of Davy Crockett before the Civil War and intensifying in the later decades of the century, the glorification of the Western pioneer and cowboy would reign in the American imagination. Seen in that light, Two Cows by Caroline Clowes would have begun to look old-fashioned at the end of the century, and Aiding a Comrade by Frederick Remington would have looked new and fresh. So we can see that the art of Caroline Clowes, with her magnificent representations of animals in natural settings, was exhibited and appreciated during her lifetime. She was destined to remain unknown and underappreciated after her death. Gender, style, and the American ideal were all issues that worked against creating her fame. Now, however, we can look at her life and work with new appreciation. We can see that she was an artist who was superb in craftsmanship. While she was trained in academic traditions, she used them to great effect. She can be seen as the last bloom of the all-American Hudson River School of Landscape Painting. She can also be seen as perhaps the finest American painter of her time. Thank you.